Welcome to Whispers of Dharma, where stories of karma, compassion, and rebirth are softly told to heal the soul. The grandfather clock in Elena's study had been chiming 13 times at midnight, every night for 6 months. Sandalwood incense burned perpetually on her desk now, curling smoke around the letter she could never bring herself to open. The envelope bore her father's handwriting, shaky, desperate, postmarked 3 days before his death. But tonight, something moved in the shadows beyond the window, a figure that shouldn't exist, carrying flowers that smelled the forgiveness, standing in a garden that had been empty for 20 years. If forgiveness is weakness, why does it heal the strongest wounds that karma has carved into our souls? Elena lived alone in the house where her childhood had shattered. Victorian walls that held too many secrets, floorboards that still creaked with the weight of old arguments. She had inherited it all: the mahogany furniture, the oil paintings, the unspoken shame that hung in every room like dust motes in afternoon light. The sound of wind chimes on the front porch had become her evening ritual. Each metallic note, a reminder of the Buddhist wisdom she'd been studying. Each gentle ring, an echo of the compassion she struggled to feel. For months, Elena had been preparing for something she feared to name, learning about the endless cycle of rebirth, trying to understand how karma moves through generations like blood through veins, carrying both poison and healing. Her father had died believing she would never forgive him for what he'd done to her mother. And Elena had spent every day since wondering if some wounds were too deep for forgiveness to reach, even after death. She had been 12 when the hitting started. Elena remembered hiding behind the kitchen door, watching her mother's face change from hope to fear to something far worse: acceptance. But there had been good moments too before the drinking consumed him. Her father teaching her to garden, his hands gentle with seedlings, his voice soft as he explained how roots needed darkness to grow strong. Patience and compassion, he would say. That's how you help anything broken become beautiful again. The irony wasn't lost on her now. The man who understood how to heal plants had been slowly destroying the people he loved most. The night her mother died, Elena had made a vow. Standing in the hospital corridor, 17 years old and shaking with rage, she had whispered words that would haunt her for decades. "I will never forgive you. Never." Her father had tried to reach out over the years, letters, phone calls, visits she refused. Each attempt at connection met with silence. Each plea for forgiveness returned unopened. 3 days before his death, the final letter arrived. The one that still sat on her desk, sealed with 20 years of unspoken regret. She told herself that some karma was too heavy to lift, some wounds too sacred to heal.
It started with the roses. Elena's mother had loved white roses, had tended them in the back garden until the last months when fear made her hands shake too much to hold garden shears. The rose bushes had died with her. Elena had made sure of that. But last Tuesday, Elena woke to find them blooming again. Not just alive, but magnificent. Dozens of perfect white roses where only bare earth should have been. No roots, no stems visible in the soil. Just impossibly beautiful flowers that seemed to float above the ground like prayers made manifest. And there was more. Footprints in the morning dew that matched her mother's shoe size. The scent of lavender perfume drifting through rooms that had been empty for 2 decades. And most impossible of all, her mother's voice humming lullabies in the garden at twilight. The letter on Elena's desk began to glow faintly in the presence of these impossibilities, as if her father's words were calling out across the veil between worlds.
Elena found herself drawn to the Buddhist temple downtown, where monks in saffron robes spoke of karma as a teacher, not a punishment. She sat in meditation halls, breathing incense and listening to ancient wisdom about the weight we carry from lifetime to lifetime. Forgiveness, the old teacher had said, is not something we do for others. It is something we do to free ourselves from the chains we've forged in our own hearts. But understanding and accepting are different countries, separated by oceans of pain. At home, the supernatural events intensified. Elena would wake to find her mother sitting in the garden, translucent as morning mist, tending roses that shouldn't exist. When Elena approached, the figure would fade, leaving only the scent of flowers and a feeling of infinite sadness. The letter seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat now, and Elena began to understand that her mother's spirit was trapped, held earthbound by Elena's refusal to release the anger that had become her constant companion. In Buddhist wisdom, she learned that souls cannot find peace when forgiveness is withheld, that compassion, even for those who have hurt us most deeply, is the key that unlocks both their freedom and our own. But knowing the path and walking it are separated by the weight of 20 years' worth of righteous rage.
The night Elena finally opened the letter, her mother appeared more solid than ever before. The envelope tore open with a sound like old wounds breaking, releasing words that had waited 2 decades to be heard. "My dearest Elena," it began, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know the man I became was not the father you deserved or the husband your mother deserved." As Elena read, her mother's spirit sat beside her, one translucent hand resting gently on Elena's shoulder. "I was broken long before I broke our family. My own father's fists taught me the only language I knew. But that is explanation, not excuse. I choose every day to be the monster that drove away the two people I loved most in this world. Elena's hands shook as she continued reading. I am dying, Elena, and I need you to know that forgiveness isn't something you owe me. It's something I pray you'll give yourself. Your mother, she visits me in dreams. She tells me that anger is a poison we drink hoping others will suffer. She wants you to know that love doesn't die when people do. It just waits. Elena looked up to find her mother's spirit smiling with infinite tenderness, mouthing words Elena couldn't hear but somehow understood. Let go, sweetheart, for both of us. But as Elena reached the letter's final page, the atmosphere in the room changed. Her mother's spirit began to fade more rapidly, and a new presence made itself known. Her father appeared in the doorway, not as the broken man he'd become, but as she remembered him from childhood. Gentle hands, kind eyes, the parent who had loved her before alcohol and anger consumed him. I'm sorry, his spirit whispered, the words carrying the weight of 20 years' regret. I'm so sorry, Elena. I understand if you can't forgive me, but please, forgive yourself for the anger you've carried. It was never yours to bear. Elena felt something crack open in her chest, 20 years of frozen grief beginning to thaw. But with that melting came a flood of pain so intense she could barely breathe. This is what rebirth means, her father's spirit continued. Not just coming back, but letting what was broken in us be remade into something capable of love. The two spirits, mother and father, stood together now, waiting for Elena's choice. Elena sat in the silence between heartbeats, between breaths, between the person she had been and the person she could become. The letter trembled in her hands. The roses outside glowed with their own inner light. For the first time in 20 years, Elena let herself remember her father's love alongside his failures. She understood now. Karma wasn't about punishment or reward. It was about learning, lifetime after lifetime, how to love more perfectly, how to forgive more completely, how to transform pain into wisdom. Her parents' spirits had been trapped not by divine judgment, but by Elena's refusal to release them. Her anger had become their prison, and their freedom required her healing. The Buddhist wisdom she'd been studying suddenly crystallized into truth. Suffering is the teacher, compassion is the lesson, and healing happens when we choose love over the security of our wounds. Elena closed her eyes and whispered the words that had been waiting 20 years to be spoken. I forgive you, Dad. I forgive you, and I forgive myself for carrying this anger so long. The room filled with light as compassion finally broke through the walls she'd built around her heart. As Elena opened her eyes, she found herself alone in the study. But something had fundamentally changed. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as if a storm that had been brewing for decades had finally passed. The grandfather clock chimed midnight exactly 12 times. Elena walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The roses were still there, but now they had proper roots, proper stems, growing from earth that looked newly tended. On the garden bench sat a small wrapped package that hadn't been there moments before. Inside, Elena found her mother's favorite locket, the one she'd been buried with, and a note in her father's handwriting. Some gifts can only be given after forgiveness teaches us how to receive them. But the real twist came the next morning when Elena discovered that the house she'd inherited was not the only inheritance waiting for her. Her father had secretly established a foundation for families affected by domestic violence, funding it for 20 years with money Elena had never known existed. The final surprise, he had named Elena as the sole director, with one condition written in his will. Only if she can find in her heart to forgive a broken man who loved imperfectly, but completely. Sometimes the greatest healings happen not when we finally receive what we thought we needed, but when we discover we always had what we were truly seeking.